Clara signed the divorce papers with a flourish, the expensive fountain pen scratching against the thick, creamy paper. A laugh, sharp and triumphant, escaped her lips. She thought this was the end of a long, embarrassing chapter. She didn't know it was the beginning of the end of her entire world. The man sitting opposite her, her husband of 8 years, Alex, watched her with an unnerving calm. He had always been quiet, a trait she'd once mistaken for gentleness and later despised as weakness. What she didn't know was that his silence was not emptiness, but a vault. And within days, the contents of that vault would dismantle the life she cherished, piece by gilded piece. The grand, sun-drenched living room, with its soaring ceilings and views of the city skyline, had been the stage for his greatest humiliations. Soon it would be the theater of his vindication. We love a story where the tables are turned, don't we? Where the underestimated finally show their true strength. If you love stories like this, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. And tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. Now, let's go back and see how it all began. The tension in the air was as thick and heavy as the damask curtains that framed the dining room windows. It was a familiar atmosphere, one that had settled over their marriage like a persistent fog. Every dinner with her family was an ordeal, a carefully orchestrated performance where Alex was unwittingly cast as the fool. Tonight was her father's 65th birthday, and the entire family was gathered around the polished mahogany table that had been in her family for 3 generations. "Alex, my boy," began Marcus, Clara's father, his voice booming with the false bonhomie he reserved for people he considered his lessers. "Still tinkering with those little residential projects? Any plans to build something significant?" He gestured vaguely with a hand laden with a heavy gold signet ring, the implication hanging in the air like cigar smoke. Significant, he meant, like the skyscrapers his firm financed. Alex placed his fork down gently, the silver making no sound against the bone china. "There's a project I'm quite invested in, yes," he said, his voice even and measured. "It's demanding, but I believe it will be worthwhile." Clara's brother Julian let out a short, derisive laugh. Julian, who had skated through life on family money and a series of failed ventures, saw Alex as the ultimate target. "Worthwhile?" Julian smirked, swirling the deep red wine in his glass. "Is it a 2-car garage this time, or are you moving up to a garden shed? Don't strain yourself, old boy. Ambition can be terribly stressful." Clara didn't defend him. She never did. She offered a tight, apologetic smile to her family, a silent plea for them to tolerate her husband's mortifying lack of drive. Her smile was the cruelest cut of all. It said, "I know. I'm as embarrassed as you are. Forgive me for my poor choice." Her mother, Eleanor, a woman who measured worth in carats and square footage, chimed in, her voice thin and sharp. "Clara, dear, I do hope you're making sure Alex doesn't overextend himself. We wouldn't want him getting any grand ideas his talents can't support." Each word was a meticulously placed stone, building a wall of condescension around him. They saw him as a failed architect, a man coasting on their daughter's social standing, living in a house far beyond his means. The house, this magnificent structure of glass, steel, and stone, a masterpiece of modern design that they all assumed was a relic of her family's portfolio. They thought he was merely a resident, a temporary custodian of their legacy. Alex met their condescending gazes, one by one. He felt the familiar, hot sting of humiliation, but he pushed it down, compressing it into a cold, hard diamond of resolve in his chest. His hand went to his jacket pocket, his fingers brushing against a cool, metallic object. It was a pen, not the cheap ballpoint he usually carried, but a heavy, custom-made fountain pen, its barrel crafted from polished obsidian and brushed titanium. It was a gift, a symbol of a world they couldn't even imagine he was a part of. He looked across the table at Clara. Her face was a mask of strained politeness, her eyes avoiding his. He saw the flicker of annoyance, the deep-seated disappointment that had become the foundation of their relationship. She had wanted a titan of industry, a man whose name was a brand. Instead, she believed she had gotten a quiet craftsman who was content with mediocrity. "The project is quite large, actually," Alex said, his voice still quiet but now laced with a new, almost imperceptible edge. "It involves a complete reimagining of the city's southern skyline." Julian nearly choked on his wine. "The southern skyline? What are you going to do, design a particularly innovative park bench?" The table erupted in polite, cutting laughter. Alex didn't smile. He simply held their gazes, his expression unreadable. He was an architect. He understood structure. He knew that even the most imposing edifice has a load-bearing wall, a critical point of failure. He had spent years watching them build their fortress of arrogance, and he had spent just as long identifying the exact point where a single, well-placed truth would bring it all crashing down. The dinner continued, a symphony of subtle insults and polite dismissals. Alex ate his meal in silence, the quiet observer, the man they thought was nothing. And in his pocket, his fingers wrapped around the obsidian pen, a silent promise of the storm to come. He was just waiting for the right moment to start the demolition. The days that followed the disastrous birthday dinner were a masterclass in passive aggression and overt disdain. The humiliation was no longer confined to family gatherings. It had seeped into the very walls of their home. Clara treated Alex less like a husband and more like a disappointing piece of furniture she hadn't yet gotten around to replacing. She would hold loud, cheerful phone conversations with her friends, detailing her fabulous life, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper whenever she mentioned her husband's quaint career. One morning, as Alex was preparing to leave for the small, unassuming downtown office he rented, Clara stopped him in the grand foyer. She looked him up and down, her gaze lingering on his simple, well-worn leather briefcase and the modest cut of his suit. "Are you really going to meet a client looking like that, Alex?" she asked, her tone a mixture of pity and disgust. "That suit is fine for a junior associate. My father wouldn't be seen in anything less than bespoke Savile Row." "My clients care more about my designs than my labels, Clara," he responded, his voice betraying no hint of the sting her words caused. "That's because your clients are probably renovating their kitchens," she shot back, turning to adjust her reflection in the enormous, gilt-framed mirror. "You don't understand, Alex. Image is everything. It's the language of success. You're speaking a different dialect entirely, a dialect of adequacy." He said nothing, simply watching her preen. He thought of the man he was actually meeting that day. Not a homeowner wanting a new deck, but Mr. Alastair Harrison, the legendary and notoriously private founder of the Harrison Group, a global development conglomerate. Their meetings took place not in Alex's humble office, but in a secure, unmarked suite Harrison kept, a war room of blueprints and scale models. Alex wasn't just a designer for Harrison. He was the lead architect for Meridian, a multi-billion-dollar project so secret and ambitious it was known only by its codename. Later that night, long after Clara had fallen asleep in their master suite, Alex retreated to his private study. This was his sanctuary, the one room in the house that was truly his. Clara called it his hobby room. It was a sleek, minimalist space dominated by a massive drafting table and state-of-the-art computer monitors. Here, the tinkerer, she mocked, became a visionary. He spread out the latest schematics for Meridian. It wasn't a building, it was an ecosystem. A series of interlocking towers that would generate their own power, recycle their own water, and create a vertical city complete with parks, residences, and commercial hubs. It was the project of a lifetime, a design that would redefine urban living for the next century. His work was methodical, intense, his focus absolute. His hand reached for the obsidian fountain pen, the gift from Harrison, He unscrewed the cap, the movement precise and practiced. Harrison had given it to him when they'd finalized the master design. A tool for a master craftsman, the billionaire had said, his eyes sharp with respect. This will build more than just buildings, Alex. It will build a legacy. Alex held the pen, its weight cool and substantial in his palm. During the day, in the face of his family's scorn, it was a secret talisman, a physical reminder of his true worth. In the quiet of the night, it was his instrument. He began to sketch, the nib gliding across the paper, leaving a trail of sharp, black ink. The lines were bold, confident, weaving together to form structures of impossible grace and strength. This was who he really was. Not the timid man who absorbed insults at the dinner table, but the mind behind this breathtaking vision. A floorboard creaked outside his study. He quickly covered the schematics. Clara stood in the doorway, wrapped in a silk robe, her face etched with a familiar irritation. "What are you doing in here? It's 2 in the morning," she said, her voice heavy with sleep and annoyance. She glanced at the covered papers on his desk. "Still playing with your little drawings?" "Alex, this is becoming an obsession. It's not healthy. Normal people with normal jobs sleep at night." He felt a surge of anger, so sharp and pure it almost made him gasp. He wanted to rip the cover from the blueprints and shout, "Look! Look at what I'm building! This little drawing is worth more than your family's entire dwindling fortune." But he didn't. The architect in him knew that timing was everything. You don't place the capstone before the foundation is secure. Instead, he simply looked at her, his expression placid. "Just working out a few details on a project. I'll be to bed soon." She sighed, a sound of profound and weary disappointment. "Fine, just try not to wake me when you come in." She turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the long hallway. Alex stood alone in his study, the silence of the massive house pressing in on him. He looked from the covered blueprints to the obsidian pen in his hand. He thought of Clara's parting sigh, the finality in it, the utter dismissal. He knew this couldn't go on. The humiliation was no longer a dull ache. It was a corrosive acid eating away at his dignity. He had been patient, waiting for the project to reach a critical stage before revealing his position. But now it was no longer just about the project. It was about reclaiming himself. The structure of their marriage had failed. It was time for a controlled demolition. The anniversary party was meant to be the social event of the season. Marcus and Eleanor were celebrating 40 years of marriage, and they had rented out the grand ballroom of the city's most exclusive hotel. Hundreds of guests, a veritable who's who of the city's elite, mingled under crystal chandeliers, their laughter echoing off the marble floors. For Alex, it was the 9th circle of hell, dressed in black tie. He stood by Clara's side, a silent accessory to her glittering social performance. She was radiant in a couture gown, moving through the crowd with an easy grace, accepting compliments and air-kissing acquaintances. Alex, in his perfectly tailored but understated tuxedo, was treated like a shadow, an inconvenient appendage she was forced to drag along. People's eyes would meet his for a fraction of a second before sliding away to someone more important. He was invisible. The climax of the evening was the series of toasts to the happy couple. One by one, friends and family took the stage to share fond, sycophantic memories. Then it was Julian's turn. He sauntered to the microphone, a champagne flute in hand, a predatory gleam in his eyes. He started with glowing praise for his parents. Then his gaze swept the room and landed, with theatrical precision, on Alex. "And I want to give a special thank you," Julian began, his voice dripping with false sincerity, "to my brother-in-law, Alex. He's a constant reminder to us all that you don't need to be a titan of industry or a captain of finance to be, well, to be here." A wave of uncomfortable chuckles rippled through the crowd. Clara's smile tightened, a rictus of embarrassment. "He's a man of simple tastes and simple ambitions," Julian continued, warming to his theme. While the rest of us are out here trying to build empires, Alex is content to build— What is it you're building now, Alex? A nice deck? A gazebo? In a world of lions, it's good to have a hamster. It keeps things in perspective. The laughter this time was louder, less restrained. It was the sound of a pack turning on a wounded animal. Alex stood perfectly still, his face a neutral mask. He could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes on him, a mixture of pity, amusement, and contempt. He felt Clara's hand on his arm, not in support, but in a desperate, pinching grip, as if willing him to disappear. Inside his tuxedo pocket, his knuckles were white as he clenched the obsidian pen. He focused on its weight, its solid reality, a stark contrast to the flimsy, glittering artifice of the room. Each mocking word from Julian was a hammer blow, not breaking him, but forging his resolve into something harder, sharper. He didn't look at Julian. He looked at Clara. He watched as she forced a laugh, siding with the jackals, sacrificing him on the altar of her family's ego. That was the moment, the precise, crystalline moment, the last thread of his patience snapped. It wasn't a loud, dramatic break, but a quiet, internal severance. He had absorbed their scorn, endured their condescension, and tolerated their disrespect for the sake of a peace that never existed. No more. When the toasts were over and the music swelled again, Alex quietly excused himself. He walked out of the ballroom, leaving the cacophony of laughter and clinking glasses behind. He found a quiet alcove in the hotel lobby and pulled out his phone. He scrolled to a single contact, Alistair Harrison. He didn't call. Instead, he sent a simple, encrypted text message. The personal situation has become untenable. I need to accelerate the timeline. Is the asset package ready for immediate execution? He stood there, the distant thrum of the party a world away. He was no longer the man in the ballroom, the hamster among lions. He was an architect, and he was about to demonstrate the true meaning of the word structure. He was about to show them all what happens when you mistake a foundation for a doormat. A minute passed, then two. His phone vibrated in his hand, a reply from Harrison. It was just 2 words: execute at will. Alex took a deep breath. He felt a profound sense of calm settle over him, the serene focus of a man who knows exactly what he is about to do. He put the phone back in his pocket, his hand brushing against the pen one last time. It no longer felt like a shield. It felt like a key. He turned and walked back towards the ballroom, not to rejoin the party, but to collect his wife. The performance was over. It was time to strike the set. The drive home from the party was a study in frigid silence. Clara sat pressed against the passenger door of their car, the physical distance a clear metaphor for the emotional chasm between them. The city lights blurred past, painting fleeting streaks of color across her stony face. She was furious, but not at her brother for his cruelty. She was furious at Alex for being the cause of her embarrassment. "I have never been so mortified in my entire life," she finally said, her voice low and seething. "Did you see the way people were looking at me? At us? Like we were a joke." Julian was out of line, Alex stated, his eyes fixed on the road. "Of course he was out of line," she snapped. "But he wouldn't have had the ammunition if you weren't— you. Why can't you just be more? Do more? You have no ambition, Alex. You're content to be small, and you're dragging me down with you." He didn't respond. There was nothing left to say, no defense to mount that she would ever hear. He simply drove, the powerful engine of the car a low hum beneath them. When they arrived back at the house, she swept past him, her gown rustling in anger. The next day, she presented him with an ultimatum. It came not in a fit of rage, but with the cold, calculated precision of a business transaction. She found him in the library, a room he had designed to be a sanctuary of light and quiet contemplation. She, however, used it primarily for its aesthetic, a backdrop for her social media posts. "Alex, we need to talk," she began, her tone devoid of emotion. "This isn't working. It hasn't been working for a very long time. I've spoken to my lawyer. The papers are being drawn up." He looked up from the book he was reading. "Divorce?" It wasn't a question. "Yes," she said, relieved by his lack of argument. "It's for the best. I need to be with someone who shares my aspirations, someone on my level." She paused, then delivered the final dismissive blow. "I've already found a new apartment, a lovely penthouse downtown. I'll be moving my things out over the next few weeks. You, of course, will need to find a new place to live once the house is sold." He felt a strange sense of detachment, as if he were watching a scene play out from a great distance. The final straw hadn't been Julian's public mockery, but this cold, casual eviction from his own life, from the very home he had poured his soul into. The house. She spoke of selling it as if it were a handbag she'd grown tired of. "The house will be sold," he repeated quietly, his eyes drifting around the room, taking in the perfect joinery of the floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, the way the afternoon light fell through the clerestory windows he had so carefully placed. He had designed every inch of this space. He had overseen its construction, argued with contractors over millimeters, selected every piece of stone and wood himself. It wasn't just a house, it was a part of him. "Naturally," Clara said, already mentally redecorating her new penthouse, "the market is excellent. It should fetch a significant price. My half will be more than enough for a fresh start." He nodded slowly. "I see." That night, after she had gone to bed, dreaming of her new life free from the dead weight of his mediocrity, Alex went to his study, the quiet before the storm. He didn't turn on his computer or unroll his blueprints. Instead, he sat at his desk and looked out at the glittering cityscape. He felt a profound sense of melancholy, not for the end of his marriage that had died long ago, but for the waste of years, of hope, of the love he had once felt for the woman sleeping down the hall. He opened a locked drawer in his desk. He bypassed the files for the Meridian project and removed a single, thick folder. The cover was simple, bearing a single label: contingency. Inside was a collection of documents he had been quietly assembling for over a year, with the help of Alistair Harrison's formidable legal team. It contained contracts, ownership deeds, financial statements, and a meticulously detailed timeline of events. It was the architectural plan for the complete deconstruction of Clara's world. He laid the documents out on his desk. The original deed to this very house, listing the owner not as Alex or Clara, but as a holding company under the umbrella of the Harrison Group. A copy of the lease agreement stipulating that the house was provided to him, Alex Monroe, as part of his compensation for his role as chief architect. A detailed breakdown of his personal finances, showing a portfolio so vast it would make Clara's father's wealth look like pocket money. And finally, the documents pertaining to the penthouse she was so excited about. He had arranged the purchase himself through a proxy weeks ago. It was another asset waiting to be leveraged. He sat there for a long time, the city lights reflecting in his calm, steady eyes. He was not a man driven by rage or a thirst for petty revenge. He was an architect, and he believed in balance, in structural integrity. Clara and her family had created a profound imbalance, a structure built on a foundation of lies and arrogance. He was simply about to restore equilibrium. With surgical precision, he would remove the rotten supports and let the entire corrupt edifice collapse under its own weight. He picked up the obsidian pen, its cool weight of familiar comfort. It was time to draw the final line. A week later, the divorce papers arrived. Clara had them delivered by a messenger, as if serving a subpoena. She called him into the main living room, the room with the soaring ceilings and the panoramic city view. It was late afternoon, and the sun cast long shadows across the Italian marble floor. The stage was set. "They're here," she announced, her voice bright with a triumphant edge. She gestured to a sleek leather portfolio on the glass coffee table. My lawyer was very efficient. It's all quite straightforward. A simple dissolution. Alex walked over and stood opposite her, the coffee table a stark dividing line between them. He looked at the portfolio, then back at her. Her face was flushed with victory. To her, this was the finish line, the moment she shed her drab, disappointing husband and stepped into a brighter future. "I'm glad you're finally seeing reason, Alex," she said, her tone softening into one of condescending magnanimity. "There's no need for this to be ugly. We'll split the proceeds from the house 50-50, as is standard. You can have the car. I won't contest it. Consider it a parting gift." He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "That's very generous of you, Clara." Her smile widened. His compliance was everything she had hoped for. "I just want us both to be able to move on. I'm happy, Alex, truly. And I want you to be happy too, in your own way." She opened the portfolio and pulled out the signature pages. She picked up the expensive pen she'd bought for the occasion, a slim, elegant Mont Blanc. She signed her name with a confident, sweeping flourish, a gesture of liberation. Then she slid the papers and the pen across the table to him. "Your turn." He didn't pick up the pen. Instead, he remained standing, his hands clasped loosely behind his back. His calmness seemed to unnerve her slightly. "What are you waiting for?" she prompted, her voice losing some of its cheer. "It's what we both want." "Before I sign anything," he said, his voice quiet but resonant in the large room, "I think it's important to have a moment of clarity, to acknowledge what led us here." She sighed, a flicker of impatience in her eyes. "Alex, please don't make this a scene. There's no need for a dramatic post-mortem." "I'm not interested in drama," he replied. "I'm interested in truth. For 8 years, I have lived in a world of your family's making, and I think it's time I shared my perspective." He began to pace slowly, his footsteps echoing softly on the marble. "I remember our first anniversary. You returned the watch I bought you because it wasn't a brand your father would approve of. You told me it was sweet that I tried." Clara shifted uncomfortably. "That was years ago. What's the point of this?" "I remember the dinner where you explained to your mother, in front of me, that my parents were simple people from a perfectly adequate background, as if you were describing a reasonably priced hotel. They are simple people, Alex. That's not an insult. It's a fact." He ignored her, his voice remaining steady, methodical. "I remember every single time your brother called me the hamster or asked about the gazebos I was building. And I remember that you never, not once, told him to stop. You would just laugh along, that tight, embarrassed laugh. 'Oh, for heaven's sake, that's just Julian's way. You're being overly sensitive.' And I remember last week," he said, stopping his pacing to look directly at her, "at your parents' anniversary, when Julian called me a hamster in a room full of 200 people. I remember the sound of the laughter, but most of all I remember you laughing with them." His voice didn't rise. It didn't tremble. It was the voice of a judge reading a verdict. "That was the moment I realized our marriage wasn't a partnership. It was a performance, and I was tired of my role." Her face hardened. "So this is what this is? A little tantrum? You're going to list every perceived slight from the last decade? Fine, get it all out. Then sign the papers so we can be done with this." "You're right," he said, walking back to the table. "The list is long, and time is valuable." He reached into his own briefcase, which he'd placed by his chair, and retrieved a folder. It was not the thick contingency file, but a much slimmer one. He also took out his own pen, the heavy obsidian fountain pen. He sat down, opened his folder, and looked at her. "You want me to sign? I will, but we'll be using my documents. They're a bit more comprehensive." Clara stared at him, a flicker of genuine confusion in her eyes. The unshakable calm, the quiet authority, this was an Alex she didn't recognize. The hamster was gone. She didn't know what was sitting in its place, but for the first time that day, a sliver of apprehension pierced through her triumphant haze. The real demolition was about to begin. Clara stared at the slim folder Alex had placed on the table. A nervous energy began to replace her smug confidence. "Your documents? What are you talking about? My lawyer is one of the best in the city. Everything is in order." "I'm sure he's excellent," Alex said, his voice smooth as polished stone. He slid the papers she had signed back into her portfolio and pushed it to the side, a gesture of dismissal. Then he opened his own folder. The documents inside were printed on the same heavy, high-quality paper, but they bore the letterhead of a law firm so powerful and exclusive that Clara's father could only dream of having them on retainer. "As I said, your settlement proposal is a good starting point, but it's based on a few fundamental misunderstandings," Alex continued. He slid the top sheet across the glass table to her. "The first pertains to this house." Clara snatched the paper, her eyes scanning it impatiently. Then they stopped. She read the sentence again and again. The color drained from her face. Her triumphant smile had vanished, replaced by a mask of slack-jawed disbelief. The document was a copy of the original deed, dated 10 years prior. The owner was listed not as Marcus's real estate company, not as Clara, but as a corporate entity she had never heard of, Orion Holdings, LLC. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "This is a fake. This house has been in my family for years." "No, Clara," Alex said, his voice patient, as if explaining a simple concept to a child. "The land was in your family, but 30 years ago your grandfather, in a moment of financial distress he never told anyone about, sold it. He then leased it back for a pittance to save face. That lease expired 10 years ago. The new owner, a developer, was about to build a skyscraper here." He let that sink in. He saw the frantic calculation in her eyes as she tried to process this impossibility. "That developer was Alastair Harrison," Alex continued, "and I was the young architect he had just hired. I convinced him not to demolish the site. I showed him my design for a new house, this house. He liked it. He financed its construction and registered it under one of his holding companies. Orion Holdings is a subsidiary of the Harrison Group." He paused, then delivered the quiet bomb. "This house was never yours, Clara. It was never your family's. It's a corporate asset, and for the past 8 years it has been part of my compensation package as chief architect for the Harrison Group's North American portfolio." The Mont Blanc pen slipped from her numb fingers and clattered onto the glass table. The sound was unnaturally loud in the suddenly silent room. "Chief architect?" she stammered. You rent a tiny office downtown. You work on renovations." "I rent that office for my personal projects, yes. The gazebos, as your brother calls them," Alex said, a hint of irony touching his lips for the first time. "My real work, the work I've been doing for the last decade, happens at a secure, off-site facility. The work on projects like Meridian." He pushed a second document towards her. It was the cover of a highly confidential project portfolio, stamped with the Harrison Group logo and the codename Meridian. Below it, in clear, bold letters, were the words, "Lead designer and chief architect, Alexander Monroe." She stared at his name. Alexander Monroe. Not the simple, unassuming Alex she thought she knew, but a name attached to a project of unimaginable scale. "But the money," she faltered, her mind reeling, desperately trying to find solid ground in her collapsing reality. "Your salary, it's modest." "My salary is indeed modest," he agreed. "My real compensation is in equity. Stock options in every project I design. A portfolio managed directly by Harrison's own team." He slid a third document across the table. It was a single-page summary of his personal net worth. The number in the bottom right corner had so many zeros she couldn't immediately process it. It was a figure that dwarfed her family's entire fortune, a fortune she now realized was more performance than reality. Her breath came in ragged gasps. The beautiful, sunlit room began to feel like a cage. Every object she had once seen as a symbol of her own status, the art on the walls, the designer furniture, the very floor beneath her feet, was in fact a product of the man she had so thoroughly despised. And finally, Alex said, his voice softening slightly, as if feeling a flicker of pity for the sheer totality of her ruin. Your new penthouse. He pushed one last document toward her. The purchase agreement for the downtown apartment she had been so excited about. You were right, it's a beautiful property. That's why I had my asset manager acquire it 2 months ago. You signed a lease, Clara. You don't own it. My company does. Your first month's rent is due on the 1st. The statement landed. Simple, devastating, final. Clara looked from the papers to his face. The man she had mocked, humiliated, and discarded was the architect of her entire existence, and she had just handed him the detonator. The triumphant laugh she'd let out just minutes ago now seemed like a shriek from a distant, foolish ghost. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. She had built her life on a foundation of perceived status and inherited glory. Alex had just shown her it was all a house of cards, and he was the one holding the final, winning hand. The silence in the room stretched, thin and brittle. Clara's face was a canvas of warring emotions. Stark disbelief, dawning horror, and the first desperate flicker of panic. She looked down at the document spread before her like the wreckage of a shipwreck, her mind refusing to accept what her eyes were seeing. No, she whispered, shaking her head. No, this is a trick, a sick, elaborate joke. She fumbled for her phone, her fingers trembling so badly she could barely unlock it. She speed-dialed her father. Dad, she said, her voice high and strained. Dad, you need to listen to me. Alex he's saying the house, he's saying it's not ours. He has these fake papers. Alex simply sat and watched, his expression unchanged. He heard the muffled, tinny sound of Marcus's voice on the other end of the line. Clara's face contorted as she listened. What do you mean you know? She cried, her voice cracking. What do you mean he called you an hour ago? Why didn't you tell me, Dad? She went quiet, listening, her eyes wide with betrayal. What do you mean there's nothing you can do? She pulled the phone away from her ear and stared at it as if it had burned her. Her own father. He had already folded. Just then her phone buzzed with an incoming call. It was Julian. She answered it on speakerphone, a desperate hope that her brother would have some way to fight this. Clara, what the hell is going on? Julian's voice was not his usual slick, confident purr. It was a panicked squawk. My broker just called me. I got a margin call on the Kalis Tech investment. I'm going to be wiped out, completely wiped out. Alex leaned forward slightly. That was the investment you so generously encouraged me to get into last year, wasn't it, Julian? He said, his voice carrying clearly to the phone. You said it was a sure thing. I thought it was a poor risk, so instead of investing, I had my team analyze the company's vulnerabilities. Turns out, it was a house of cards. All it took was one well-placed short position to bring it down. I initiated it this morning. You? Julian shrieked through the phone. You did this? Why? Consider it a lesson in due diligence, Alex said coldly. Never underestimate the quiet players in the market, or in your family. He gestured for Clara to hang up. She did, her hand moving with the slow, dazed motion of an automaton. She stared at him, her world shrinking to the space between them. The man she had planned to discard, with a parting gift of a used car, had just bankrupted her brother with a phone call and checkmated her father without breaking a sweat. The power dynamic had not just shifted, It had been inverted with a brutal, whiplashing force. "Alex," she began, her voice now a desperate, pleading whisper. "Alex, please, we can talk about this. There has to be a way. We can fix this." The "we" hung in the air, a pathetic attempt to reclaim a partnership she had long since destroyed. "Fix what, Clara?" he asked, his voice genuinely curious. "My career? It seems to be in excellent shape. My finances? They are secure. The structural integrity of my life is sound. The problem, it seems, is with your life, and you are the architect of that." He stood up, the movement fluid and final. "The divorce papers I've drawn up are on the table. They are non-negotiable. You will leave this house by the end of the week. You will receive a standard alimony for a period of 12 months, enough to live modestly while you figure out what to do next. That is all." 12 months? She choked out. "Alex, I can't. My lifestyle." "Your lifestyle was a fantasy," he said, his voice firm but not cruel. "It was a stage set, and the show is over. It's time to find out who you are when there are no props and no audience." As if on cue, the doorbell rang, a clear, resonant chime that echoed through the vast room. Alex didn't seem surprised. He walked to the foyer and opened the door. Standing on the threshold was a man in his late 60s, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, with an air of quiet, absolute authority. His face was famous in the circles Clara so desperately wanted to dominate. It was Alistair Harrison. "Alex," Harrison said, his voice a low rumble of respect. He stepped inside, his eyes sweeping the foyer with a proprietary air. "Everything proceeding as planned?" "Alistair, thank you for coming," Alex said, shaking his hand. "Yes, we're just finalizing the transition." Harrison's gaze fell upon Clara, who was standing frozen by the coffee table. He looked at her not with anger or pity, but with a complete and total lack of interest. It was the look one gives to a piece of furniture that is about to be moved into storage. He didn't acknowledge her presence at all. He turned his back to her and addressed Alex. "The board is ecstatic about the Meridian launch next quarter," Harrison said, clapping Alex on the shoulder. "The cover of Global Architect is already confirmed. Your legacy is secure, my boy." That was the final, devastating blow. The public validation, the undeniable proof. Alistair Harrison, a man her father spoke of in hushed, reverent tones, was treating Alex not just as an equal, but as a prized protege. Clara finally understood. She hadn't been married to a hamster. She had been married to the lion, and she had been too blind, too arrogant to see it. She sank onto the sofa, the beautiful, ridiculously expensive sofa that wasn't hers. And for the first time in her adult life, she felt the terrifying, unmooring sensation of being utterly and completely powerless. The days following the revelation were a blur of quiet, efficient dismantling. True to his word, Alex's team handled everything. Movers arrived, professional and discreet, to pack Clara's belongings. They worked around her as she wandered through the house like a ghost, touching the smooth, cool surfaces of things she had always taken for granted, now realizing she had no claim to any of them. The house itself seemed different, colder. The light falling through the windows no longer felt warm and inviting, but clinical and exposing. Her phone, once a constant source of social validation, fell silent. Her friends, who had been so eager to celebrate her impending freedom, were now conspicuously absent. News in their circle traveled faster than light, and the story of Clara's spectacular fall from grace was the new, delicious gossip. She was no longer a desirable connection. She was a cautionary tale. The most painful confrontation came from her father. Marcus arrived at the house 2 days after the confrontation. He looked older, smaller, the usual booming confidence gone from his voice. He found Clara in the master bedroom, staring blankly at a row of empty designer boxes. He didn't rage or recriminate. His response was far worse. It was one of quiet, profound disappointment. I saw the portfolio, he said, his voice raspy. The one Alex sent me, the Meridian Project. It's breathtaking. The man is a genius. He shook his head, a look of weary regret on his face, and we treated him like a court jester. He tricked us, Dad, Clara said weakly, searching for any narrative that didn't cast her as the villain. No, Marcus said, his voice firm. He didn't trick us. He was simply himself, and we refused to see it. We were so blinded by our own pathetic vanity, our obsession with appearances, that we couldn't recognize true substance when it was living under our own roof. He looked around the magnificent room. This whole time I thought this house was a testament to our family's legacy. It turns out it was a monument to our ignorance. He finally looked at her, and his eyes were filled not with anger, but with a deep, sorrowful clarity. We built our family name on a reputation for integrity and shrewd judgment. Your grandfather, for all his faults, understood that. You traded that birthright for glitter, for the approval of shallow people. You belittled a good man because he wasn't flashy enough for you, and now you have neither the man nor the glitter. He turned and left without another word. His judgment was more devastating than any financial loss. He had held up a moral mirror, and Clara was horrified by the reflection. Meanwhile, Alex's life was moving forward with serene momentum. The day after the confrontation, Alistair Harrison had personally escorted him to the true headquarters of the Meridian Project. It was a sprawling, high-tech campus that looked like something out of a science fiction film. The entire senior team was assembled, and Harrison had announced Alex's transition to a more public-facing role now that his personal entanglements were resolved. The announcement was met with a standing ovation. These people, engineers, urban planners, financial wizards of the highest caliber, had known Alex's true worth all along. They had respected his desire for privacy and shielded his work from the outside world. Stepping into that room was like coming home. The unexpected ally, Mr. Harrison, proved to be more than just a powerful business partner. He had become a mentor and a friend. He saw the toll the years of quiet humiliation had taken on Alex, even if Alex himself downplayed it. Dignity is a shield, Alex, but it can get heavy, Harrison had told him as they overlooked a holographic model of the Meridian Towers. You carried it well. Now you can finally set it down and just use your tools. On the final day of the week, as the last of Clara's boxes were being loaded into a modest rental van, Alex came to see her one last time. He found her standing in the now empty living room. The space, stripped of its furniture and art, was still beautiful, a testament to the purity of its design. She looked small and lost. The designer clothes she wore seemed like a costume, her posture defeated. The movers are finished, she said, her voice flat. I know, he replied. He handed her an envelope. This contains the address of your new apartment, the one you'll be leasing, along with the keys and the first alimony payment transferred to your account. Everything is in order. She took the envelope, her fingers brushing his for a fraction of a second. She flinched as if from a static shock. She looked up at him, her eyes swimming with unshed tears, a desperate question in them. Why? He answered the unspoken question. You asked me once why I couldn't just be more. The truth is, I was always more. You just weren't looking in the right places. He turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing in the empty hall. He didn't look back. The demolition was complete. The site was cleared. It was time to start building something new. 6 months passed. The city's landscape, both literally and figuratively, had changed. The cover of Global Architect magazine was a striking photograph of Alex Monroe. He stood on a high floor of a half-finished skyscraper, blueprints in hand, the city sprawling behind him. He wasn't smiling, but his expression was one of deep, settled confidence. The headline was simple. The quiet visionary, Alex Monroe in the billion-dollar bet on the future. The article inside was a glowing tribute to his genius. It unveiled the Meridian Project to the world, a breathtaking vision of a new urbanism that was hailed as the most important architectural endeavor of the 21st century. His name, once whispered with derision in Clara's social circles, was now spoken with awe in boardrooms and design forums across the globe. Alex had moved out of the grand house. It remained a corporate asset of the Harrison Group, a showpiece for visiting dignitaries. He now lived in a space he had designed for himself, a penthouse apartment, not the one Clara had leased, but another, more personal one. It was smaller, warmer, filled with books, art he truly loved, and the comfortable quiet of a life lived authentically. He was often seen with Alistair Harrison, not as a subordinate, but as a respected colleague. He was happy, not in a loud, performative way, but with the deep, abiding contentment of a man living in alignment with his purpose. The consequences for Clara's family had been swift and severe. Julian, wiped out by the margin call, had been forced to declare bankruptcy. His flashy lifestyle evaporated overnight. He lost his sports car, his condo, and the respect of the financial community he had tried so desperately to impress. He was last heard of working a mid-level sales job, the swagger gone, replaced by the haunted look of a man who had flown too close to the sun and had his wax wings melted by a man he thought was a hamster. Marcus and Eleanor had retreated from the social scene. The loss of face, combined with the sudden realization of their own financial vulnerability and moral bankruptcy, had broken their spirit. They sold their sprawling family home and downsized, their lives shrinking in proportion to their diminished status. The empire they thought was rock solid had been a facade, and the man they had mocked had exposed it with a single, effortless push. And Clara's new reality was the most dramatic transformation of all. The generous alimony from Alex was enough for a clean, modest apartment and living expenses, but not for the lifestyle she felt was her birthright. The couture gowns were sold, then the jewelry, then the car. She had to find a job for the first time in her life. She ended up working as an administrative assistant at a small marketing firm. The work was humbling. The daily routine of answering phones, scheduling meetings, and fetching coffee was a world away from her old life of charity luncheons and gallery openings. But in the crucible of that humility, something began to change. Stripped of her status, her wealth, and her social circle, she was forced to confront the person she had been. Without the glittering distractions, she saw the ugliness of her own arrogance, the casual cruelty she had mistaken for wit, the profound emptiness at the core of her life. One evening, sitting alone in her small, generic apartment, she did something she hadn't done in years. She took out a pen and a simple piece of paper. She began to write a letter to Alex. It was not a plea for more money or a request for forgiveness she didn't deserve. It was a confession. She filled pages, her handwriting surprisingly steady. She acknowledged every slight, every insult he had listed, and added more of her own that he had been too gracious to mention. She admitted her fear, her insecurity, the desperate need for validation that had driven her to be so cruel. She didn't make excuses. She simply laid the truth of her character bare. "You were right," she wrote on the final page. "I was living in a fantasy. And the saddest part is, I had something real and wonderful right in front of me, and I was too foolish to see it. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that I finally see. I see you, and I see myself. Thank you for showing me the truth, as painful as it was." She folded the letter, placed it in a simple envelope, and sent it to his office. It was the most honest act of her life. Alex received the letter at his new office, a corner suite with a view that seemed to encompass the entire city. He recognized Clara's handwriting on the envelope and felt a flicker of apprehension. He expected a demand, a complaint, another attempt at manipulation. He almost threw it away. Instead, he opened it with the obsidian pen, slitting the envelope with surgical precision. He read the letter, his expression unreadable. He read it once, then a second time. The words were not the ones of the woman he had divorced. They were the words of a stranger, someone who had been forged in the fire of her own making. He felt no surge of triumph, no satisfaction at her prostration. The anger he had carried for so long had already dissipated, replaced by the peace of his new life. Reading her words, he felt a distant, quiet sadness, a sense of mourning for the potential of the person she might have been, for the marriage they might have had if she had found this clarity years earlier. But he was an architect of the present and the future, not the past. The old structure was gone, and he had no interest in rebuilding on a cleared site. He walked to the window and looked out at the city. The skeletal framework of the first Meridian Tower was already climbing into the sky, a testament to his vision and his work. It was a symbol of his future, a future he had built with his own hands, on his own terms. Clara's letter offered a chance at a different kind of closure. Not reconciliation, but release. He owed her nothing, but he owed himself peace. He took out his phone and sent a simple, 7-word text message to the number he still had for her. "I have read your letter. I wish you peace." He hit send, then deleted her number. It was done. The final scene of their drama was not a confrontation, but a quiet moment of solitary grace. Alex put down his phone and turned back to the drafting table that now occupied a place of honor in his office. The late afternoon sun streamed through the window, bathing the room in a warm, golden light. He picked up the obsidian fountain pen. It felt different in his hand now. It was no longer a talisman against humiliation, no longer a key to unlock a secret revenge. It was simply a tool, an extension of his mind and his passion. He unrolled a fresh sheet of paper, the blankness of it a field of infinite possibility. He touched the nib to the surface and began to sketch. A new idea, a new design, a new dream taking shape. He was not defined by the woman who had underestimated him, nor by the family who had scorned him. He was not defined by his wealth or his secret power. He was an architect, a builder, and he was finally free, building a life as beautiful and as structurally sound as the towers he sent soaring into the sky. The ultimate lesson, perhaps, is that true worth is not something that can be given to you or taken away. It isn't measured in dollars or applause or the envy of others. It's a quiet internal structure built over time with integrity as its foundation and dignity as its frame. The world can batter it, people can ignore it, but they can never demolish it. And in the end, it's the only structure that truly matters. What did you think of Alex's final decision? Was it the right one? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective makes these stories so much richer. And if you found this story satisfying, please don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales of justice and vindication. Thank you for being here with me today. Until next time.